Welcome to the Private Corporate Counsel Podcast. My name is Tee Persad. I'm a lawyer, mediator, and business consultant in Private Corporate Counsel. As part of our podcast, we try to find people who have a wealth of knowledge, experience, skills, and abilities that transcend the profession in which they have been practicing for some time. Today, we have the pleasure of spending some time with Jose Sariego. He's a partner at Bilzin Sundberg. He's a corporate partner there. He's had a wealth of experience not only practicing law, but in the business sector, working for international, multinational corporations in various capacities. His experience is not only deep, but wide, working in business-related matters, legal-related matters, governance, and other issues that span over 3 decades. Jose, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today in our Private Corporate Counsel podcast.
Thank you very much, Tee. Pleasure to be here.
Now, Jose, you and I have known each other for a little while. I am one of the members of the Florida Bar's Entertainment, Arts, and Sports Law section, and I'm the chair of the CLE section, and you've been gracious enough to do 2 CLEs now for the section. Thank you so much for that. You've had a pretty good following and really interesting topics that you presented. In my experience with you, I've grown to sort of appreciate not only your knowledge base and your skill set and your experience, but the ability that you have to be fluid in your profession. And I know that fluidity only comes from years and years and years of practice. So can you tell us a little bit about the arc of your career? How did you start off and how did you end up where you are now?
Well, I'd like to start at the end, actually, because, I sometimes wonder how I got here. I was not someone who aspired to be a lawyer. I was not even, after I decided to become a lawyer, aspired to be a corporate lawyer, because when I first decided that I was going to become a lawyer, the lawyers that I saw on television were all litigators. They were all courtroom lawyers. And so that's what I thought lawyers did. And honestly, I had no idea that there were this whole group of lawyers that did something else. I mean, I guess I thought about it, in general, but I really didn't think that that was what I was going to do. So I went to law school at the University of Michigan and got ready to be a trial lawyer and took, civil procedure and a number of other courses like that, and fully expected to be a trial lawyer. To this day, I regret not taking corporate tax, because as it later turned out, corporate tax has become a very integral part of my practice. But I thought at that time, well, I took personal income tax, I'm going to be a trial lawyer, I don't need corporate tax. And then I went to a big litigation law firm in Chicago and worked there for 3 years. But within probably 12 months, I realized that litigation was not for me. And there were a number of factors on that, and really nothing to do with the firm or its practice, other than they handled really large cases, antitrust and class action, securities litigation, and that kind of thing. And the associate's life in those types of cases was difficult indeed, and you really had to work very hard. And the trajectory to becoming, a true trial lawyer, meaning actually going to court, was very long. And once I learned that, I realized that I should seek a different path, and one that fit in better with my personality, with my goals in life. I was starting to think about going back to Miami, where I'm from. And so then I switched to the corporate department. And, that was a big change for me, and not without some risk, because honestly, even then, I didn't know that much about what corporate lawyers did. But I made that switch and moved back to Miami. And that was the start of really what I would call my successful lawyer career, because I managed to land at a firm with a lawyer, Sam Allman, who some of you may know, who was just a fabulous lawyer. He was actually a tax lawyer, but also a transactional lawyer. And he was just a wonderful person. And he was my mentor. I worked with him for 10 years, became a partner in the law firm that we were in at the time. And really, he taught me everything that law school doesn't teach you about the actual practice of law, and how to deal with clients, and how to deal with ethical issues, and how to be a professional. And I give him a lot of credit for that. So then after that, I worked in the law firm for many years. And again, at that time, I thought the law firm, that's where you were as a lawyer. But over time, I realized that there were these lawyers that worked at companies. They were at big companies. And at that time, and this is 30 or more years ago, that wasn't such a common thing. The in-house lawyers at many companies were not top lawyers, because at the time, the top lawyers went to law firms. They went to the big law firms in the Northeast, or even in Florida and Miami. But over time, those corporations started to get smart, and they realized, well, wait a minute, why are we hiring just run-of-the-mill lawyers? I mean, not that they weren't good, but they weren't the top of the cream of the crop. And they started hiring more top lawyers. And so I saw an opportunity. Actually, was a client of the firm's, Telemundo, and became corporate counsel at Telemundo. Now, mind you, I was a partner at then Kelly Dry and Warren, a big New York multi-office firm that had acquired the law firm that I worked at before, Smathers and Thompson. And so I kind of took a step, back to go in-house, because, I wanted to try it. I wanted to see what that was all about. And I think that's one lesson I would give to, younger lawyers. Sometimes you got to take a step back to move forward. Sometimes you got to go sideways to move up. And, you need to not get stuck with, who you are, what your title is, or any of that. To pursue your goals, because I went from being the center of the universe, a law firm partner at a big New York firm is, masters of the universe, as Tom Wolfe would say. And I went to being an expense item at a corporation, and it humbles you. I mean, which is a good thing for a lawyer. It humbled me because there I'm not the center of the universe. To the contrary, I'm viewed as kind of an expense item, similar to the accounting department and the IT department and the human resources. Your admin, and the real stars are the business developers and the online the on-camera talent, and whatever the company's business is. So. I think to this day that every corporate lawyer should spend some time working at a corporation to both learn business, which the other aspect of my background is that I didn't have a business background. I mean, I was a journalist before I went to law school. And although I covered some business issues, I mean, I didn't have an accounting degree. I certainly didn't have an MBA. I thought about it in law school. And another regret is I probably should have stayed and gotten an MBA. But again, I was going to be a litigator. So what am I going to do with an MBA? So you learn about how businesses work on a granular level. And you learn how, more importantly, businesses look at lawyers, outside lawyers. And so I spent 20-something years as general counsel of 3 different firms. And then I came back to the law firm. And some people ask, well, gee, why would you do that? Give up a cushy job in corporate America as in-house counsel, general counsel, to come back to the law firm. Well, part of the problem with corporate America is that things change, and you get a new general counsel, you get a new CEO, and they want a new team. And, that's what happened to me at the last place I was at. I looked around, and I had friends. Some of my former partners at Kelly Dry were now at Bills and Sundberg, and I decided that I didn't want to go back to corporate America, so I went to back to Bills, and so it's been kind of back to the future. But I'm a lot wiser now, a lot smarter, both about the practice of law and about the business of law, than I ever was before I went in-house. So that's kind of my professional trajectory.
What a fascinating career that you've had, and a lot of twists and turns. One of the things I tell many of younger lawyers and many of my business clients is sometimes I have to slow you down to speed you up. And it seems like at various stages in your life, you were deliberately slowed down, and that accelerated your growth and development in your knowledge acquisition and your skill development, and certainly the experiences that you've had. I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about your early days. You're in Miami. You spent a lot of time in the Latin market and communities. What's your background? What makes you so uniquely qualified to deal with that market?
Well, and just as a general observation, I think that, of course, everything that happens in your life, particularly at an early stage, it forms your character, and it forms the, views that you have of people and the world. And not that it's immutable, but, it has a huge impact. And particularly when it's a childhood that has some challenges to it. And so I was born in Cuba, but I left Cuba when I was a young child. I left when I was 6 years old. And not only did I leave, but I left in a program called Pedro Pan, which was a program that were kids of middle class and upper class Cubans who were very frightened about the Fidel Castro regime at the time. This was in the early 60s. Decided to send their kids out of the country to at least get them out of harm's way. And so my parents put me and my sister, who was 9 years my senior, on an airplane and sent us to the United States, sight unseen. Put us into the care of the Catholic Church at the time. And that program, initially started very small and later expanded, and to the point where more than 15,000 children were smuggled out of Cuba at some point.
I had no idea. That's you learn something new every day, and that's something I did not know about. And so I find that fascinating that the Catholic Church would have been so involved in that transition for so many people.
Well, there's some interesting books and even movies that have been, and a lot of people don't know that actually, but it was the start of the transformation of Miami, because when I came here, like, nobody spoke Spanish. I mean, nobody can even imagine that today. Yeah. And Miami, even Miami Beach, Brickell, where I'm sitting right now, there was nothing here. Literally nothing. So it was at the very beginning. But of course, that forms your character. And things that appear horrible at the time, and it was very difficult. I spent time in an orphanage. I was separated from my sister. But then eventually I was placed with an American family. They were my foster parents, a wonderful Midwestern couple who, again, heard the call from the Catholic Church that, they needed people to take in these children. Again, sight unseen, don't even speak the language. They had 3 kids of their own. And they took my sister and me for over a year while my parents were able to then make their escape from Cuba. And although, again, difficult, the wonderful thing was that I learned English as if I was a native. And right. To this day, although I'm fluent in Spanish and it's my first language, I'm actually more fluent in English. I was a professional journalist. I'm now a lawyer. I work with words all the time. I write, I speak, as you know. So I'm totally fluent in English. And, I say I'm like 95% in Spanish because I'm not native fluent in Spanish. So, but that experience, first of all, it taught me at an early age self-sufficiency and independence and perseverance.
But also the value of good relationships too, right?
And the value of good relationships, that's true. Very, very good point. So that was my early years. And then, over time, of course, Miami transformed. It became more Hispanic. There was the various waves of Cubans in particular. First of all, the wave that I was a part of, which was the first wave, And then came the Freedom flights and Mariel and, the whole story. So then Miami became, Hispanicized. But I had then left Miami, went to the University of Florida to become a journalist, came back briefly and was a professional journalist for the Miami Herald, and then went to law school in the Midwest. I went to the University of Michigan and I worked in Chicago. So I was gone for a good chunk of time there while this transformation was going on in Miami. And when I finally came back in 1984 from Chicago, Miami was a very different place from when I left. And I found that honestly, my Spanish was not good enough. It wasn't business Spanish, it was conversational Spanish. And it was a challenge for me to kind of relearn Spanish or learn it really at a higher level. And but I was determined to do that because I figured, gee, you got a Spanish name, you got to speak Spanish.
It would help.
So I tried many different things, but what really stuck was I was back at being a partner at a law firm, and I met a woman who was working in word processing, and she was Bolivian, but she was fluent in Spanish and actually in several languages, a brilliant woman. And she, so I said to her one day, look, you're going to be my assistant. And from now on, you'll never speak to me in English again. And for the next 3 years, basically, I had Berlitz, every day, total immersion in Spanish. And at the same time, I started to work on more, international matters involving people, of Latin backgrounds. And so, the two came together, and you can hardly avoid it here in South Florida. So that's my early years, and the part that really formed what I became.
So tell me about your parents a little. I mean, it must have been extremely scary for them to just let both of their children leave and go to a new country altogether and place their faith in the Catholic Church. I mean, realistically, the institution's there, but strangers nonetheless. And hope and pray for the best. What type of experiences have you had dealing with that transition, and how did you manage to overcome those issues that sort of are natural when you break away at such a young age from your parents?
Well, I get choked up sometimes, thinking about them because I have 2 children, and I can't even imagine. I cried when I sent them to college, here in the United States. So I can't even imagine what they were thinking because, there were no guarantees. There were no guarantees that where they sent us was going to be a good place. There were no guarantees that they were going to be able to leave. And one of my mom's sisters, my aunt, was stuck in Cuba until she died.
Mm.
Her daughter, who's my cousin, left, but wasn't reunited for more than 20 years with her mother. So, what must have gone through their heads, I can't even begin to imagine. But the thing that got me and virtually all of these Pedro Pan children through, and by the way, this has been documented that many of those Pedro Pan children became super successful. There's a definite trend that those particular children have become developers and lawyers and doctors and very, very successful people, for a variety of reasons. But I think again that experience had something to do with that. But the other thing was that, there was family, there was love, there was support. And we were very fortunate because I was reunited with my parents in about a year, actually less than a year. But my father, who was rather forward thinking, he was, at the time, everybody was convinced we were going back to Cuba in no time. But he wasn't so sure about that. And so I actually lived with this American family for another 6 months while he got his, self together and that kind of thing. because he thought, I should again assimilate and learn the language and American culture from these wonderful people. And then, secondly, he didn't think that this was gonna be a short-term thing, as indeed it hasn't. So I think it was, again, the family support is what really got us through. We're still, very close knit. It's a big family, and luckily, we're almost all of us here in South Florida, and some of us have moved to other places, but for the longest time, we all lived near each other and spent a lot of time together with a lot of different family things. And it was always a mixture of the cultures because, obviously we tried to maintain the Cuban culture and Cuban traditions and holidays and that kind of thing. But, we also had the American side of it. And I remember my dad would have parties at his house, and the folks that he worked with, I mean, they loved to come there and have, lechon and rice and, all Cuban food. And I mean, they just love that. So I learned early about the value of, I guess, diversity. This is one of the hot topics these days. I mean, I honestly think that it happens best when it's organic, but, sometimes it does need to be encouraged or even forced sometimes. But back then it was pretty organic, and at least in my case. And then my children have grown up with, total diversity all around them because Miami is diverse. Miami is a very diverse city.
100%.
Highly Hispanic, but it also has, today anyway, many folks from Europe and from, many different countries. And I think it's a pretty diverse city, and which I think is good. Like, my kids, working with other cultures, I mean, it's just second nature to them.
Oh, yeah. Well, Miami is the gateway, just inbound and outbound for so many places in the world. And so, I can see why the cultural aspect of it is so diverse. This initial period of your life, let's say from when you left Cuba to when you graduated from high school, it seems like some of the common themes are there were strong relationships that you had that really made an impactful difference in your life. There was a lot of challenging moments that really build resilience and give you the opportunity to learn how to bounce back from really difficult situations. I think a lot of times most of the people I bump into that are younger lawyers or even entrepreneurs, they just don't have that opportunity to reflect back and appreciate some of the difficult points in their lives and how they've overcome those and use those same lessons to face challenges as they go forward and they try to achieve their goal or try to make progress in their profession. So how did you take all of that knowledge and those experiences and the resilience that you build up and catapult that into your journalism career?
Well, early in your life, you probably will identify certain things that you're good at and certain things that you're not so good at. And I kind of divide the world into numbers people and word people. And pretty early, like my son's a numbers person. I'm not. I've learned numbers because I'm a business lawyer, but I'm really strong with words. So I, early on realized that I could write. And I would write things particularly in high school, I wrote, in fact, I was just going through some old boxes at home. And I realized I wrote all this stuff back in high school. I was quite prolific, and poems and short stories and stuff like that. And then, to the point where actually one of my poems was in the high school yearbook.
Wow.
And so, so now I wanted to be a writer. And I went to college, St. Leo College over near Tampa, and, fully expecting to be a writer. But it's funny, I got homesick and I decided to come back to live with my parents after just one semester. And but then they had a wonderful journalism program at what was then Miami-Dade Community College. It was really a 2-year college. Now it's a 4-year college. And it seemed like a good transition for me. I guess I wasn't ready to leave home yet. I hadn't really thought about how to really monetize this writing ability. And journalism seemed like a good way to kind of channel that ability and yet, make a living. So I took journalism, graduated from Miami-Dade College, and back then, if you went to a community college, you could go to any of the state schools, University of Florida, Florida State, basically with very little requirements. You were almost automatically allowed in. So then I went to the University of Florida, which was really one of the top journalism schools at the time, and and to this day. And there I was exposed, again, I was this little Cubanito, living in Miami, living at home with my parents, and it was kind of this sheltered world. And then I went to the University of Florida and, really just opened up my vista about, what was possible, frankly. And not that there weren't challenges. I mean, I remember they had and still have a very fine student newspaper, which is not a campus newspaper. They were actually kicked off campus before my time for publishing abortion information at a time when abortion was illegal in Florida. We're now back to the future, but back then it was a crime to publish information, and yet they did, information about where to get an abortion outside of Florida.
Sure.
And so they were kicked off campus, literally. And so they were a freestanding newspaper when I joined them. And that experience was fabulous because it wasn't, just your typical student newspaper. I mean, they did hard-hitting news and opinions, and they had advertising and all this stuff. And I was very shy and very insecure about my abilities. But, one thing I've learned is that you just got to sometimes jump in and just, see what happens. And so I just showed up one day and said, hey, I want to join the staff. And they said, sure, there's a typewriter. Back then it was typewriters.
Sure.
And, here's an assignment. And I went from there. And then again, I found that I was good at it to the point where I became an editor and, got an award for writing and all this stuff. And then lo and behold, I was hired by the Miami Herald, which at that time was one of the preeminent newspapers in the entire Southeastern United States.
For a long time, actually, right?
For a long time. Unfortunately, newspaper business has gone out unless you have big money behind you, like the New York Times or the Washington Post. But and the Herald's like basically just an online paper now. But back then it was a full-blown newspaper. And what happened was I wasn't hired for the main office, even though I clerked there. Well, I clerked one summer in Miami, and my best experience or my best memory of that. I mean, I did some very interesting stories. But one of the most interesting experiences was that I had a desk between two Pulitzer Prize, one actual and one future Pulitzer Prize winners. One was Edna Buchanan, who was a police reporter, very striking woman with this big, bouffant hairdo and just, a legend. And then, what was his name? His last name was Miller. Now I forgot his first name, but he was responsible for freeing two prisoners who were on death row. And he wrote a series of articles that got them released, and he won the Pulitzer Prize for that. Well, I sat between them, and, back then it was, telephones and little desks. There were no cubicles, no computers, none of that. And the entire summer, neither one of them said one word to me. I was just, this intern guy stuck between them. But, they were always on the phone. They were always typing their stories. They were always in a rush. And so, I didn't get a word in edgewise. But,
proximity is power, right?
I thought that just by osmosis, I would kind of get some, and I did observe them, obviously.
Of course.
But anyway, that was a defining experience. Then I ended up in a bureau. They had these bureaus all around the state, in Tallahassee. They even had one in Latin America, as I recall. And then they had them all up and down the East Coast. And I ended up in Stuart, Florida, which back then, I mean, it's still kind of a sleepy, beach type area, a lot of retirees. And it was, you can imagine 40 something years ago, it was really quiet. but I had to fill an entire page of the Miami Herald with a partner, and 6 days a week, including photographs. So I learned some really important skills. I learned how to type without looking at the keyboard.
Yes.
I learned how to take photos. I learned how to get information and synthesize it very quickly and very succinctly. And one of my I had two partners. My first partner was a fellow named Marty Barron, who some of you may know as the former managing editor of the Washington Post. Previous to that, the Boston Globe, where they broke the story on the priests in the Catholic Church and all the abuse of the children, and won a Pulitzer Prize for that, and they made a movie out of it. But back then he was just a colleague. I mean, he was just a guy, and I reached out to him since then. And then my other partner also became a lawyer. Eric Ryder is now a lawyer in a big New York firm. So again, the people that you work with, and then all of a sudden they become famous like 20 or 30 years later. I mean, so back to the relationship issue. You never know.
Very important. Very important.
You never know who you're going to be sitting next to.
Yeah. And that's so true. That's so true. I was on an airplane once. I was in first class, and I was the only non-celebrity in first class. And I still have relationships with a couple of those people I met, and they've referred me clients over the years. But again, just being at the right place at the right time and paying attention to those relationships and minding those relationships, very, very important. You said something that I thought you said a lot of things that I thought was interesting, but one thing that stuck out really particular is that you were a word person and your son's a math person. So I'm reading this book now called Frames of Mind, The Theory of Multiple Intelligences. And it's interesting because the first intelligence that they cover in the book is linguistic intelligence or word intelligence. And the second one they cover is musical intelligence. The third they cover is math intelligence. And so the theory is that there's so many different types of intelligences that are not tested but are pretty obvious, like kinesthetic intelligence, for example, and super athletes. When you read many of the other books dealing with finding your purpose and finding your why and finding your higher purpose, they almost all focus on what our natural intelligence is. And for you to be able to tap into that natural intelligence at an early age and then actually pursue that and then find your higher purpose and then actually have the opportunity to be in a profession that you actually practice that and build that intelligence to the level to where it is, I think it's really instrumental and fascinating for anyone out there listening to us today, as really identifying what that intelligence that you have that's innate. You'll have other intelligence, but what stands out? And how can you really capitalize on that and have that be the foundation of your trajectory to whatever profession you choose. So fascinating. So you become a journalist, you have all these great experiences, and you decide, okay, maybe I want to try something else. You want to be a trial lawyer. You want to actually switch professions altogether. What was the thought process that led you to that decision?
Well, before we leave the word part, I just want to say to the audience that because I teach at the University of Miami Law School, and I get this question a lot, how did you end up where you ended up, and similar to what questions you're asking me. And, I've given this some thought, and there's a lot of thinking that you should do what you love. And of course, if you can do what you love, that's great. But I think a more practical thing is do what you're good at.
What you're good at.
If you're good at it, you'll get positive reinforcement, you'll advance in your profession, and you'll kind of learn to love it. I mean, because, if you could be, you could love being a novelist, for example, and, I'm still working on that. But if you're starving to death, you may end up very frustrated in your life and not be able to, progress. And of course, the luckiest people are the ones that, love what they do and they're good at it, of course.
Yes.
But I was not going to be a lawyer. See, I never thought I would be here. I mean, again, to go back to the beginning, I sometimes wonder, I'm like, how did you end up here? I wanted to be a writer, and I was a good writer, and I was a good writer at the Miami Herald. But then I realized that the kind of writing that I wanted to do was not journalistic writing. Famously, Ernest Hemingway said, he was a journalist also, but he said, you got to give it up to be a writer. You can't be a journalist and be a, good fiction writer. And I realized that I wasn't cut out for kind of this daily journalism, even though I was good at it. And, honestly, I wanted to make more money. And I had heard that there were some journalists who had become lawyers and that, they had been successful at it. And this was, again, before the internet, before any of that stuff. So I just started kind of thinking about it and looking into it. And of course, back then you applied on paper. So I started applying to all these law schools. And even then I didn't know Harvard from the University of Florida. But I applied because I'd heard of Harvard, and I don't know how I got into the University of Michigan, honestly, but I applied to them, and lo and behold, they accepted me. And Harvard put me on a wait list. And I often wonder, because there are crossroads in your life, when you kind of go in one direction or another, and you wonder what would have happened had I stayed. And I wonder, had Harvard accepted me, would I have gone there? Well, they didn't accept me, so I ended up at the University of Michigan. And, that again was this eye-opening experience for me. Because I moved out of the state of Florida and was living in the Midwest and, cold, like really cold. And secondly, because I was again exposed, at the University of Florida was a mind expander. The University of Michigan was just exponentially more mind expanding for me. I was just exposed to thinking and concepts and people that, I just had no idea even existed. And I had to challenge, and, it was a super challenge for me because I came there with some preconceived notions about a lot of things. And boy, they were like beaten out of me in a hurry in a Socratic debate. People just like questioning you, and even among your friends, you would debate things, and then professors, they would ask you these questions, and you're like, what? Like nobody ever asked me these things.
Yeah, your belief system gets challenged on a daily basis. Your values get challenged on a daily basis, and then you sort of re-examine yourself and think, who really am I?
Right, and that was a big challenge. And the one thing I guess I would say to folks, because some could view my career and say, well, gee, you can't hold a job. He's had all these different jobs and all these different places, and what's up with that? But part of it is that, again, sometimes in order to advance, you've got to take risks, and they should be calculated risks. You shouldn't do things just willy-nilly, although some people do, and they're very successful at it. Mine was a calculated, risk. I mean, back then, the law was, a ticket to wealth and prosperity. I mean, there was I feel bad for students and young lawyers today because I think it is way more competitive. It is way more difficult in just the day-to-day, notwithstanding technology, which actually I think has made it worse.
And not to mention the cost. People come out of law school with $250,000 in debt, and they think they're going to get jobs that pay $250,000 a year. But it's so competitive that, if you're lucky to be in the top 10%, you may fall in that category. But if you're not, it's a rude awakening.
Very true. But sometimes you got it, I gave up a perfectly good career in journalism because I wanted to do something else. I gave up a position as a partner in a New York law firm because I wanted to do something else. And there were no guarantees that I was going to succeed at any of that. I became an intellectual property lawyer. I mean, when I joined HBO, I didn't know anything about intellectual property. But you kind of learn it as you go if you have certain skills and you have certain, base. And in part, you have to have confidence in yourself, obviously. And then, I think there's a certain streak of stubbornness that you just think you can do things. And it's, a certain amount of hubris, really. But I mean, who thought that I could go to Michigan and be successful? But you just have to say, well, why not me? And trust that if they accepted you, well, they must think you can do it. I mean, they're not going to extend an invitation to somebody they don't think is going to succeed.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really great point. If we look outside of ourselves and see how other people view us, that may give us an opportunity to propel ourselves forward in a way that we wouldn't do on our own. So that's a very interesting perspective. Going through your professional life and starting off in the personal, and thank you very much for sharing that, by the way. What a fascinating story. And I think that's instrumental for so many people who just didn't have those types of struggles at the beginning stages of their lives, and to know that people can overcome those things, and maybe be encouraging to them to know that, well, the things that they've gone through, they can overcome as well. As you set out to acquire your knowledge that you needed to actually be where you are today, to develop the skills, to acquire the tools and the abilities and the experiences, was there a point in time where you said, this is who I am now, and this is who I want to be, and I'm going to set out to be that person? Did you create the Jose that we see today, or was it by luck or happenstance?
Well, I think there is luck. I mean, I do believe that, we sometimes are in a position that allows us to do certain things, even in this, great country. I mean, again, going all the way back to when I was a child, I mean, the U.S. opened me with open arms. I mean, and they gave us stuff, and, we used to get things from the government, like, food and clothing and things like that. And, not that everybody was supportive here, but I would say, a lot of people were supportive. And obviously this, family that took me in was super supportive. So I think luck has something to do with that. Because we certainly didn't know that we were going to land with those people in particular. But I also believe that, you make your own luck, and that you have to be ready when opportunity comes. You have to recognize it, at least in some nebulous way. And sometimes it's not like a clear, well, gee, obviously I'm going to take that job. And again, going back to sort of this, self-confidence and stubbornness, that, that you feel like, well, gee, if they offer me the job, I'm going to take it. And that's when I go back to the Harvard, Michigan thing. I did have the conscious thought that I was going to go to the best university, law school, that I could. And so had Harvard accepted me at the time, I didn't realize Michigan's a much better law school than Harvard, but at the time, Harvard had that.
You're going to make some enemies with that comment, but I'll leave it at that.
We call Harvard the Michigan of the East, of course.
Okay.
So, but I would have gone. I would have gone to Harvard, and I wonder what my life would have been like. The other time, another crossroad in my life was in my second year of law school, I clerked in San Francisco at what was then the biggest, Pillsbury Madison, the biggest law firm in San Francisco. And, had a successful summer, and they offered me a job along with a couple other friends. Again, back then you got 7 job offers. I mean, if you applied, they offered you a job, unlike today. But then I got this offer from Jenner & Block in Chicago, and I had applied to them for the summer, and they didn't accept me. But then they accepted me for a permanent position, and I wanted to be a litigator, and I thought Jenner & Block was a better litigation firm, which I, think, at least in terms of some of the bigger cases that they handled, probably was true then. I don't know about now. And, so I made the conscious decision. I'm going to give up San Francisco, which, is a wonderful place. I mean, lovely, and, had all these offers, and they wined and dined me and took me to Napa Valley, and I mean, it was lovely. To go to Chicago, a city that I had never, other than a couple of interviews, had never set foot in. Of course, has a reputation, city of big shoulders, brutal winters. But I did because I wanted to be a litigator, and I wanted to go to where it was going to be the most challenging. I left the partnership to go in-house because, and I didn't even know what in-house was. I just thought, this is something that I want to do, and I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna take the risk. And then I got the call to go to HBO, and again, I didn't know much about intellectual property, but I figured I'd learn it just like I learned everything else. I mean, I didn't know anything about litigation when I joined the litigation firm. So yes, there were times, but then other times I feel like I just sort of floated into, certain things. And part of it was just in general journalism to begin with, because again, I wanted to be a writer, but I sort of saw this as a soft landing and to get to use my skills. And then when I left journalism to go to law school, I sort of had this nebulous notion that I wanted to do something else and something different, but it wasn't like I'd always wanted to be a lawyer. Honestly, I didn't even know what a lawyer did. So I think it's a combination of some of those factors. But, a lot of it has to be that you're willing to, to see things that are, in front of you, and to have the gumption, to, some would say, foolishness to do some of these things. And not that it was easy. I mean, when I went to Chicago, first of all, the winters were indeed brutal. And, the practice was extremely difficult, and the city was, tough. I remember getting on the L and jostled by all these people and all that. It was, but then again, I met two of my best friends who now are semi-retired in Naples, and I see them now in Naples, and I've met them in Chicago. And I built networks and knowledge and what have you that, had I gone to San Francisco, I don't know if I would have been as successful. I don't know. So
I see two really
settle for the easy path, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I see three themes. When I listen to you, I hear three big themes. One is when a challenge comes up, you face it head on. The other one is there have been some great relationships that I've had the privilege of forming over the years. And the third one being that the diversity of experiences was so enriching for you personally, which really became enriching for your career.
Well, and the last one I think is important because the trend in the law, of course, is towards specialization. Yeah. And, most of my partners here are really good at, one or two main things. I am not. I am pretty good at certain things. But what I bring to the firm and what the firm has monetized is that I do have this breadth of experience. I have handled many different things. I'm referred to here a little bit as kind of a utility player or a jack of all trades or whatever. But
Swiss Army knife kind of guy.
Well, when they don't know what to do with something, they call me. They say, gee, have you ever heard of this? And, a lot of times I have, because, as a general counsel in particular, 20 years I spent as, the general counsel, and you can't tell the CEO, well, gee, I'm going to refer this to Bills, they're okay with referring a big transaction or a big litigation or something, but the day-to-day, that's what they hired you for.
That's your job.
So I've done a bunch of things that I don't do anymore here because, again, we have specialists. So I've done finance work, but I don't do that anymore because we have specialists. Real estate, even I've done leases. I haven't done like pure dirt, what I call dirt real estate.
Yeah, the horizontal work. Yeah.
And things of that nature, again, that I don't do anymore. But I know my way around it. I know what the issues are. I know how to recognize what is going on, and I think that's some people are fortunate. They know what they want to do, and they just go headlong into it. I've always I'm easily bored, I guess, is part of my my character, and I have this curiosity, and I want to learn new things all the time. One of the wonderful things about the age we live in is the internet, because you can learn stuff on the internet. When before I would have to go to the library or whatever, Westlaw and all that stuff. And today it's at your fingertips. And so I get all kinds of stuff that, I have some knowledge about, but then, I go on the internet and I learn about it. And I don't just learn about the particular document or whatever it is that I'm working on. I kind of try to learn the whole parameter of the thing. And I guess it's, that journalism background. I just like to learn about things, and I find the best part of my practice is the people. I really enjoy dealing with entrepreneurs, which I do a lot. I do a lot of M&A transactions, and I represent a lot of sellers. I mean, I've represented buyers too, but sellers in particular. And those people are fascinating, and their businesses are fascinating. And they've made multi-million-dollar companies out of widgets. And you wonder how that happens. And unfortunately, I have not had that gene. I'm not a business owner type. I mean, I am in a sense that I'm a partner at a law firm, but not really. I mean, I've never done my own payroll or anything of that nature. So I really admire people like that. I admire business owners that, start from nothing and work, and they, build these businesses. And they're super interesting people. And
well, I work in that space quite a bit, and so I have I have the same admiration that you have, and having owned a law firm for the better part of almost 29 years, and having to meet payroll and rent and deal with those issues, I certainly can empathize with that sentiment. You spend a great deal of time with us today. I want to transition a little bit to entertainment, art, and sports law. You've been a member of that section for a long time, and you've been an avid contributor. In fact, at the University of Miami School of Law, you actually teach classes within the LLM program for entertainment, arts, and sports law. How did you get exposed to this area of practice? And tell me a little bit about why you're drawn to it.
Well, it is a blast, and I miss it terribly when I was in-house, because I don't do as much of it now as I did before. And it's an exciting area. The class I teach, I mean, every year it changes. Today it's titled Intellectual Property in the Digital Age, or Digital Media. And, the digital world, just every time I teach the class, I have to throw out a third of the notebook that I carry with me. I'm still analog, even though I teach digital media, and bring in another third of all this new stuff. Like today, the hot topic is artificial intelligence, whereas last year was, NFTs, and the year before that, it was something else. So it's a very fast-paced, and of course, the other thing is, you see it in the newspapers all the time. I mean, you read about these people and these transactions and these things, and it's great cocktail party banter, when you tell somebody, hey, I'm entertainment lawyer, beats being, even a real estate lawyer to strike up a conversation. But the way I got into it was so much like the rest of my career. It was networking, because, I wanted to, I was at a company, and I wanted to, been there for 7 years. I kind of done a lot of things, and I was kind of ready to move on. And a friend of one of my former partners at the law firm was looking for a general counsel for HBO Latin America. And he put me in touch with him. And, I told him from the beginning, I know nothing about intellectual property, but I did have a background in my prior company in bankruptcy. So I had spent, and I'm not a bankruptcy lawyer, but I spent a lot of time, because we had a lot of customers that went bankrupt. And so I spent a lot of time on creditors committee, which not a club that you want to be a member of. You don't want to be the chairman of the unsecured creditors committee. That is a club you do not want to be a member of. But I learned a lot. Again, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And HBO was having trouble with one of their big customers who was going into bankruptcy, DirecTV Latin America at the time. And so they said, yeah, sure, no, you can work on that. And so I learned it as I went along. And and it's just a fascinating area, because primarily because of technology, because technology moves way faster than the law. And so you have judges, and many of them are not techies, trying to fit a round peg in a square hole, trying to apply principles that are in some cases hundreds of years old to AI. And so you now have all these lawsuits that you see, people are trying to register a copyright or register into a patent that an AI algorithm robot created. And the USPTO is saying, no, because this was created for humans. And then you have people suing AI, Chat GPT, because they say that they're infringing on their copyrights, that they're taking their works and using it to train the AI machine. I mean, these are mind-boggling. This is like science fiction,
Yeah.
And so it really is a fascinating area. So it's easy to get hooked on it. And like I said, I miss the day-to-day of it. But part of the problem, and one reason I'm very happy where I am, is that field is, combustible. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on. There's mergers, there's spin-offs, there's all kinds of things that happen. And of course, the C-suite gets recycled quite a bit. And then secondly, and I hate to say this, but it's true, they value youth. And when you're, a lawyer, I'm approaching 70, I'll be 70 later this year. My days in corporate America are over. But at a law firm, you can work till look at the Supreme Court. You can work until you're no longer valuable. So long as you're valuable, you're going to stay. At many law firms, some of them have mandatory retirement, but Bilzen does not. And we have lawyers, in their 80s practicing here and being super productive. And I find, again, there's good and bad of those two situations. The good thing about the law firm is, again, I'm sort of the center of the universe. I like being the center of the universe. And then secondly, you're surrounded by other lawyers, your peers, and you can have these kind of in-depth discussions about the law that you really can't have as general counsel of a company. First of all, you're the boss. And number two, the other business people, they don't care about the fine points of the law. All they care is they want an answer.
They want an answer, they want results. That's it.
And they want results. And again, it makes you a better lawyer. I mean, I'm glad I had that experience. I'm glad I've been fortunate enough to have both. But right now, I'm in a happy place. I really am, because I get to work on a lot of different things. Again, I'm sort of the lawyer of last resort at the firm. And many of them are innovative. I don't do the same thing every day. Sometimes I have 12, 14 time entries on my timesheet. But I like that. I like that sort of fluidity to it. So, I'm going to stick around until they kick me out of here, I think.
Well, that's a perfect transition, because what I want to talk about now is when someone has gotten to the point where they've achieved prime in their professional life cycle, and they're getting to that point of aging, there's a natural shift in our biology, there's a natural shift in our mental capacity, in what we're thinking about, in our emotional experiences, and quite frankly, in the things that we want to do. Have you gotten to the point where you're making that transition, or are you thinking about that transition?
Well, certainly you got to think about it. Once you get to be my age, you definitely think about it. And the firm thinks about it. Last year or the year before, we were coming up with a corporate business plan, and succession planning is super important. So my role has shifted, and even though I still work on a lot of stuff, now I view my primary role is to teach and mentor the younger associates and even some of the junior partners who are coming up through the ranks and who haven't had this, wealth of experience and what have you. And that's part of the reason that we have a 3 days in the office rule, so that we can get together and we can impart some of that. It can be done in other media like Zoom and what have you, but there's no substitute for being together and kind of seeing each other. And even though I don't want to come back 5 days a week, but I do think that it is important to come in and show your face and be available, and just kind of people come in your office and can talk to you without trying to set up a Zoom meeting or whatever. So my role has transitioned a little bit to helping others. Thank goodness for them, because it's a two-way street. I mean, I don't have the energy to stay up all night and read a 100-page M&A document and in detail. I just don't have that energy anymore. So, but I have young people who do have that energy, and that's what they do. And then I see the fruits of that labor, and I comment on it. And I do still do a lot of actual writing and actual negotiating and things like that. But I do believe, I push them. my favorite expression when they ask me a question, because a lot of times they come in, well, gee, what should I do? And I said, well, what do you think? Why are you asking me? Like, you should come to me with a solution, and then I'll tell you if you're wrong. But, don't come to me with, okay, what do I do? I mean, you graduated from Boston, you're as smart as I am, you just don't have the experience. Well, make a call. And sometimes you're wrong. And we have to accept that we make mistakes. And, unfortunately, it's true. You learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. Hopefully they're not too big or too often,
Yes.
But you can't be afraid of that. And so I kind of put some of the younger lawyers front and center. If we have a conference call, I try to push them to, participate. Don't just sit there. I do it. I mean, just including them in the call is important. And some of that time we write off, and we always tell them, don't worry about that. We'll deal with the business part of it. Your role is to now learn and be able to move up so that one day you're the lead partner on $100 million M&A deal. So you do have to think about it, and institutionally the firm has to think about it. But luckily I'm in good health. I maintain myself, and I think I'm still pretty sharp. But there is definitely, you'd be foolish if you didn't recognize it, because then you might make a mistake. So I do rely, it's a two-way street. I rely on the associates to, make sure that I'm not missing something. I'm not the guy that's going to catch all the, the cross references and the defined terms and all that. I'm like, hey, you got to do that, because you've got the eye and the energy to, stay up and do that. I'm just going to look at, the bigger picture.
It's so interesting, and I want to sort of transition over to sort of an overview. We've talked today about your professional life cycle, and you had two professional life cycles. One as a journalist, and then leapfrogging from being a journalist into being a lawyer. And then within the profession of being a lawyer, you've had several job life cycles, which got you to really advance your professional life cycle. And so we were talking about your professional life cycle and your job life cycles together, because they sort of work really well together. But listening to you and really enjoying what I'm hearing that it was important for you to pay attention to your personal life cycle, your physical health. You're almost 70 years old. You're in great physical health. You're in great shape. Your mental health, your ability to capture information and process it and make it useful, your emotional health, you'll be able to regulate your behavior, and your relationships, and manage those relationships and build strong, lasting relationships, your spiritual health, the connection with the higher power, and doing something that is beyond you, that contributes to a bigger purpose than just for yourself. And then you talked a little bit about, the importance of strong relationships, and then your family, and how great that was to get your kids into prime and get them off into college, and how an emotional experience that was for you to transition from being a dad, so to speak, and being sort of the adult dad. Which is a different place. My kids are 35, 33, and 22, so I have some understanding of how difficult that is myself. And then really blending all of that with your professional and your job life cycle, and then making all of that benefit what I call your enterprise entrepreneurship life cycle. So taking all of those experiences and infusing them within the organizations that you work in, and actually help those organizations grow and develop. And so what a rich tapestry your life has been, and I really thank you so much for sharing that with us today. And I know that the people who are going to see this, which will include the members of the Entertainment, Arts, and Sports Law section of the Florida Bar, and the general public, and business owners, and young lawyers, and lawyers who are seasoned, and lawyers who are thinking about what does it look like after I decide not to practice law anymore, and how long can I practice law. I think you're going to bring a lot of value to them. And with all sincerity, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you very much. And the only last thing I want to say is that do make time for things outside the law or outside whatever you're doing, because it's very important, and it really helps you to be a better lawyer. And, when you're young and you're making your way in the world, you can become obsessive. I was certainly obsessive, but over time, I've learned to do other pursuits that have nothing to do with the law, whether it be community, charity, exercise. I mean, I became a 4th degree black belt in Taekwondo. Those kind of things, I think, help you to be a better lawyer, because, first of all, they rest that part of the brain that's being a lawyer. And secondly, they bring other experiences. You then have experiences outside the law that will color what you do within the law. So, but thank you very much for the opportunity. It's always good. I now feel like I need to give back, because people have been, great to me. I've gotten a lot of support, again, starting with, this wonderful family that took me in as a child, my great mentor, Sam Ullman, and, many mentors along the way. And now I feel like, like I need to pay it forward.
And you're doing a great job at that, because I know personally my experiences with you is that you've been very generous in your time with volunteer to share the knowledge and the skills and the experience that you have. And just the fact that you've carved out an hour and a half with us today really speaks volume of your commitment to actually contributing to younger people, and especially people within our profession. And so I thank you so much. Well, thank you again, everyone. This concludes the Private Corporate Counsel podcast. And for those of you who are watching from the Entertainment, Arts, and Sports Law section of the Florida Bar, this concludes the podcast for the Entertainment, Sports, and Entertainment, Arts, and Sports Law section of the Florida Bar. Thank you again. Jose, pleasure.
Thank you very much, Steve. A pleasure to be here.
I want to take some time to thank Jose for joining us on the Private Corporate Counsel podcast today. As you can see, Jose has a wealth of knowledge, skills, experience, tools, and valuable relationship that he has developed over the years since he entered the practice of law over 30 years ago. Join us again next time for the next Private Corporate Counsel podcast. Thank you.
Please continue to listen to our podcast to learn more. Contact us at 877-647-7887 or email us at info@pcc.law to learn more about the Private Corporate Counsel program and how we can help you and your business on your journey to success.